Her guest this week I had the great opportunity to speak to Kenan, who set up his own political party. He spoke about his motivations, the party's policies, and what he hopes to achieve. I hope you find it interesting. Hi everyone, and welcome to another interview with another politician. Maybe we can call you a politician. Kenan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Nexus?
So I'm a 16-year-old aspiring politician. I founded a political movement called the Nexus Party, which is a theoretical party that aims to influence the current political making of the country and to help broaden the political diversity of our political environment, especially in terms of government, getting into Westminster, but also acting as a pressure group to influence policy and to push policy forward for the average citizen.
Fantastic. So can you tell me a bit more about it? So what was the moment or experience that made you decide to start the party, and how is it different from traditional UK parties?
So it's different as in the fact that we focus on pragmatism, which is obviously a very overused word. However, we first need to understand the basis of pragmatism versus ideology, because we're a very non-ideological party. And whilst pragmatism does often produce policies based on the condition of the state and based on the condition of the economy, the condition of the state is derived from both UK data and historical references of policies that have worked in the past, not just in the UK, but in other countries as well, if you can adapt the policies. For example, Estonia has in the past established a system, a digitalized system, that small businesses can use to automate tax filing and business registration to reduce admin costs for small and medium businesses. That has meant Estonia has been able to produce one of the best regulatory environments for business. And we plan to emulate that within the British private sector due to the fact that it has been reported by numerous organisations, such as the Federation of Small Businesses, for example, that 32% of small businesses have experienced admin costs, a rise in admin costs. So in conclusion, while there is a scenario where the idea of Nexus, which I've talked about, may not work in terms of opportunistic policy choices, condition-based policies do work when the condition has been studied, when we've shown that our policy is backed by data and how we can, for example, support small and medium-sized businesses to avoid corporate domination, as we've shown.
Can you tell us a bit more about these condition-based policies? What does that mean? Can you explain it in another way?
So obviously, the condition of our country is different from, let's say, how it was in the 1950s, 1960s. So it's obviously ever evolving, and the data obviously evolves with it. And now with politicians, we've seen with the Conservatives, they haven't really had that much change over the last 15 years. It's still the same rhetoric. It's still the same dogma when it comes to the economy. They still want to reduce public spending. They still want to reduce welfare, even though we've witnessed obviously drastic effects of those choices negative. Obviously increasing child poverty, increasing unemployment, which we obviously want to tackle. So parties should obviously adapt and not stick to one core ideology, rather we should use ideology as a versatile tool to move between the political spectrum when it's fit to do so. For example, obviously I've highlighted our policy about supporting small and medium-sized businesses, but we also need to look at left-wing policies such as the wealth tax to fix wealth inequality within our society.
So you mentioned there supporting businesses, and you also mentioned a wealth tax. What are some of the other policies you'd like to see implemented if the party got into power?
One of the main policies is obviously rejoining the EU, which I think is would be mass in favour. Yes.
You got my support there.
Yes, obviously remove trade barriers for our small businesses. We've seen export costs massively rise, and also because Europe is our largest trading partner, and we need to foster a good connection rather than alienate both ourselves and Europe between us. But also it will help with immigration, which the far right seem to have kind of avoided. We had access to the Dublin regulation, which allowed us to perhaps deport asylum seekers who were rejected in other EU member states. Now we can't do that, something that Nigel Farage hasn't really pointed out, unfortunately. But another factor is that we miss out on crucial funding, such as migration funding. For example, the new EU budget announced for 2028, if my memory serves me correctly, allocates another £60 billion to migration defence spending, which will be allocated to all EU member states. And we will miss out on that, unfortunately.
I just want to ask you another few questions more about the party itself as opposed to just some of the policies. So you invite citizens to shape policy directly. So what mechanisms are there in place to make sure that the input actually influences the decision making of the party? It's not just symbolic.
So we obviously have a very open membership that everyone can join. I'm fighting like mad to get people to join. We have multiple avenues of which you can contact both me and the general party membership. We have a content portal which members can easily put in content which they think would be beneficial to the party. I always say that British society is a wonderful society. We can make use of so many web designers, social media artists, digital artists that can help us campaign with Nexus. There are so many skills available, and we want to make as much use of that as we can. In terms of decision making, we plan to open up voting on policy, voting on different campaigning strategies, which we can develop together. So that I think is one of our plans for the future.
So it's as you say, it's also a grassroots movement.
Yes,
is very important to it. So, like, as the party expands, how are you going to maintain this grassroots approach?
so we plan on delegating certain members in different areas and local areas to expand our reach on a grassroots level, on a local level. And one of the ways we plan to do that is by focusing on media attention. And media can be separated into 4 different domains: local, national, independent, such as yourself, and legacy. We plan to utilize local and independent sources to stay local and stay grassroots in our efforts. Because as I've mentioned, we allow members to campaign on a local level and take initiative. So local news is much more readily available and readily attained than national news. It requires much more or less effort, but it also builds a very strong relationship between local peoples and obviously our party, because we are trying to target them on a local base rather than a national base, which can seem a bit generalizing. It can seem a bit like one size fits all, essentially, whereas we should aim to give each area of the UK, such as, for example, the North or the South, a tailored aspect and policy.
Very interesting. So for example, when it comes to funding, how is the party funding, or how are you planning to fund the party in the future?
So we plan for the membership to become our main avenue of funding. However, we do also have other areas such as we have membership, obviously, and have the merch. We plan on expanding our merch. For example, we've launched Nexus t-shirts.
Fantastic. So before we continue, I'll have to get those links and I'll put them in in the description of this video so people can access the merchandise as well. Okay.
But the merchandise acts as more of a secondary branch of funding because it's more of an advertisement type campaign. It's supposed to be a catchy item that we have on offer. And hats, obviously, to resist the MAGA movement, to offer some balance on the other side of the political spectrum. So we do have multiple avenues of funding, and we do try to maneuver our way to avoid big donors and avoid lobbyists to ensure that our aims stay pure.
So something that we've seen probably, on one side of the spectrum with Reform, they've got a huge amount of media attention, while on the other side, the Green Party or Jeremy Corbyn's organization is struggling to get the same sort of media attention. So when it comes to new parties, they often struggle with visibility. So how do you plan to break into a media landscape that's dominated by the mainstream parties like Labour, the Conservatives, and now Reform?
So as I've said, we can split media into 4 different domains: local, national, independent, and legacy. Legacy media is obviously very focused on 2 main parties and Reform UK, because obviously due to the fact that many of the legacy media outlets are funded by billionaires, owned by billionaires. For example, the Daily Mail, it's owned by a Viscount. I'm not sure that sounds very working class.
No.
Yes, so we try to target local media independents such as yourself, who are more independent in terms of not having access to donors or big donors or lobbyists. So we can make sure that we get the amount of fair treatment in the media as we can. We aim to expand our reach in terms of local media, expanding our reach in terms of members. For example, we have members currently, a large member base in Oxford. For example, we're looking at targeting Oxford local media, which is much more easier to access than, for example, national media, where you need much more resources, much more power to get in.
Okay, so back to the core beliefs of the party. So you said before it's not about ideology, but doesn't a party that doesn't have an ideology be run the risk of being something for everyone and also nothing at the same time? So how do you deal with criticisms like that, where you don't have an ideology, but you're a party, as you said, of um, looking at the situation, the current situation, and dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, politicians have before manipulated the situation to favour their own policies. However, each policy that we have is backed up by accurate data that's been cross-referenced, cross-researched. So I think if we as a party produce a policy that is not backed up by data and not backed up by historical references, we should be called out on that. However, when the condition of the state is analysed correctly, which is obviously a big task, but if it is analysed correctly, then the policy produced will be beneficial and will be true to the condition of our country and the economy.
So, what do you see as the future for the Nexus Party? Where do you see the party in 5, 10 years' time?
I don't really want to put a limit on it. However, we could obviously be directly fighting for government in Westminster. We could be fighting for seats in Parliament. We could also be acting as a pressure group. We could be acting as an independent political movement, and that could influence more parties than just being one single party, influence policy across the political spectrum. For example, I always use the analogy of communism. I'm not a communist, but as if you can see, communism spread throughout the globe. It wasn't just one party; there were multiple parties who took it across. And Nexus shouldn't be restricted to one party. Everyone is welcome across the political spectrum to take our beliefs and shape them to their party. For example, we have had communication with the Liberal Democrats. We had communication with the Greens, to some extent Labour. Because each party, I think, does have a section of its members that does believe in Nexus and can influence each party in our way.
Very good. So, it's you. Do you see it more as a pressure group than a political party, or should we be expecting to see some candidates put forward sometime soon, maybe at the next election, local elections, or the general election?
So I think they aren't mutually exclusive. For example, being a pressure group and being a political party can be both. However, in terms of when we do finally directly enter into Westminster and politics, hopefully, we're not going to put a definite time on that. However, we have been exploring entering the next general election, so 2029. If we do have the sufficient members of resources and sufficient membership pool to draw on, then it is certainly a possibility. I mean, anything's possible. I was sitting in my office a year ago making the manifesto, and here we are today. So yeah, anything can be possible.
It was wonderful, wonderful, and it was wonderful speaking to you today about this. Where can we find out more information about the Nexus Party and yourself?
So if you type in Nexus Party in the search bar, it should come up first option, our website, nexus-party.com. To access regular updates on our party, you can submit content, as I've said, on the content portal. You can support us through the Nexus store. You can become a member on our website. But you can also join us on Instagram. So just a couple clicks and you'll be our follower to help expand our social media campaign and our social media presence online.
And I think you're doing a wonderful thing because I think more and more people are tired with the mainstream political parties. They want change, and it's great that a young person like yourself is jumping into this and providing an alternative. So it was great to speak with you today, Kieran. If there's anything else you'd like to say before we finish, I just want to say thank you so much, and do check out the Nexus website and the links below.
Yep, that's all I have to say.
Fantastic. Thanks a
Thank you
lot.
very much. Thank you. Bye.